Question 1. Governance review demonstrates that an Alaska real estate licensee is working with a seller who is eager to sell their property quickly due to personal circumstances. The seller expresses a strong desire for a rapid sale, even if it means a slightly lower price. The licensee has access to sophisticated data analytics tools that can provide insights into buyer behavior, market absorption rates, and price elasticity for similar properties in the seller's neighborhood. Considering the licensee's fiduciary duties and the regulatory environment in Alaska, which approach best balances the seller's urgency with the licensee's professional obligations? Option A. Present a comprehensive comparative market analysis, CMA, that integrates data analytics to illustrate current market conditions, recent comparable sales, and potential buyer interest, thereby informing the seller of realistic pricing and sale timelines. Option B. Rely on anecdotal market information and the seller's personal opinion to determine a listing price that is likely to attract immediate offers. Option C. Guarantee the seller a specific sale price and a closing date within a week based on the initial data analytics to meet their urgent need. Option D. Advise the seller on a price point that prioritizes a quick sale, focusing primarily on the seller's emotional desire for expediency, without extensive data validation. The correct answer is A. Present a comprehensive comparative market analysis, CMA, that integrates data analytics to illustrate current market conditions, recent comparable sales, and potential buyer interest, thereby informing the seller of realistic pricing and sale timelines. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an Alaska real estate licensee because it requires balancing the client's immediate desire for a quick sale with the licensee's fiduciary duty to ensure the client makes an informed decision based on comprehensive data. The licensee must navigate the ethical imperative to provide accurate and relevant information without overstepping into providing financial or investment advice, which could fall outside their scope of practice and potentially lead to liability. The challenge lies in presenting data analytics in a way that empowers the client's decision-making without creating an expectation of guaranteed outcomes or influencing the client beyond the scope of their expertise. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves presenting a comparative market analysis, CMA, that incorporates relevant data analytics to inform the seller about current market conditions, recent comparable sales, and potential buyer interest. This approach aligns with Alaska real estate regulations that require licensees to exercise reasonable care and diligence and to present information honestly and fairly. Specifically, Alaska Administrative Code Title 12, Chapter 64, Section 12, AAC 64. 200 mandates that licensees shall not mislead or deceive any party in a transaction. By providing a data-driven CMA, the licensee is fulfilling their obligation to inform the seller about market realities, enabling them to set a realistic price and make an informed decision about their property sale. This approach respects the client's autonomy while adhering to professional standards. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on the seller's emotional desire for a quick sale without providing supporting data is ethically problematic. This approach neglects the licensee's duty to provide competent service and could lead to the seller accepting an offer significantly below market value, causing financial harm. It fails to uphold the principle of acting in the client's best interest by prioritizing expediency over informed decision-making. Recommending a price based on anecdotal evidence or the seller's personal opinion without any objective market data is a direct violation of the duty of care. Alaska real estate licensees are expected to base their professional opinions and advice on verifiable market information. Relying on hearsay or subjective feelings rather than data analytics can lead to mispricing the property, which can result in prolonged market exposure or a sale at a loss. Suggesting that the licensee can guarantee a specific sale price or a rapid sale based on the presented data analytics is misleading and unethical. Alaska real estate licensees cannot guarantee future market outcomes. Such a promise would constitute a misrepresentation and could lead to a breach of contract and disciplinary action by the Alaska Real Estate Commission. The licensee's role is to provide information and facilitate the transaction, not to control market forces or make guarantees. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Alaska should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes client education and informed consent. This involves 1. Understanding the client's objectives, including their timeline and financial expectations. 2. Gathering and analyzing relevant market data, including recent sales, current listings, and market trends, utilizing data analytics tools where appropriate. 3. Presenting this data in a clear, understandable format, such as a comparative market analysis, explaining its implications for pricing and marketability. 4. Discussing potential strategies with the client, empowering them to make the final decisions based on the information provided. 5. Maintaining transparency about the limitations of data analytics and the inherent uncertainties of the real estate market. This process ensures compliance with ethical obligations and regulatory requirements while fostering trust and achieving the best possible outcome for the client. Question 2. Stakeholder feedback indicates a homeowner in Anchorage, Alaska, is eager to sell their longtime family residence and believes it is worth significantly more than recent neighborhood sales suggest. The homeowner has asked you, as their licensed real estate salesperson, to price the property accordingly. Which valuation method would best serve your client's immediate goal of a successful sale while adhering to your professional obligations in Alaska? Option A. A valuation based on the homeowner's personal sentimental value and speculative future market appreciation. Option B. An income approach, estimating the potential rental income the property could generate and capitalizing that income stream. Option C. A comparative market analysis, CMA, based on recent sales of similar homes in the immediate vicinity, adjusted for differences in size, condition, and amenities. Option D. A cost approach, calculating the cost to rebuild the home and subtracting estimated depreciation. The correct answer is C. A comparative market analysis, CMA, based on recent sales of similar homes in the immediate vicinity, adjusted for differences in size, condition, and amenities. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate licensee in Alaska to balance the client's immediate desire for a quick sale with the ethical and legal obligation to provide an accurate and defensible valuation. The client's perception of value, influenced by emotional attachment and potentially outdated market information, can create pressure to inflate the estimated selling price. A licensee must navigate this by educating the client on objective valuation methods and their limitations, ensuring compliance with Alaska's Real Estate License Act and professional standards. Correct approach analysis. The most appropriate approach in this scenario is a comparative market analysis, CMA. CMA involves researching recent sales of similar properties in the same geographic area, adjusting for differences in features, condition, and location. This method is directly relevant to determining a likely selling price in the current Alaska market, as it reflects what buyers are actually paying for comparable properties. Alaska's regulatory framework emphasizes providing clients with accurate and reliable information, and a CMA, when performed diligently, offers the most direct and practical insight into market value for a residential property. It aligns with the ethical duty to act in the client's best interest by providing a realistic basis for pricing decisions. Incorrect approaches analysis. Relying solely on the income approach would be inappropriate for a typical residential property, where the primary purpose is not income generation. This approach is best suited for investment properties like apartment buildings or commercial spaces, and would not accurately reflect the market value for a family home in Alaska. Using only the cost approach is also problematic. While it can be a useful tool, especially for unique or newly constructed properties, it often overestimates value for older homes because it doesn't account for depreciation or market demand. It focuses on replacement cost rather than what a willing buyer would pay in the current Alaska market. Furthermore, presenting a valuation based on speculative future market trends, rather than current data, would be a failure to adhere to the principle of providing current and accurate market information as required by professional standards, and potentially Alaska's regulations regarding misrepresentation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should first understand the client's objective, selling the property, and then select the valuation method, most appropriate for the specific property type and market conditions in Alaska. They should educate the client on the chosen method, explaining their strengths and limitations. If the client expresses unrealistic expectations, the licensee must professionally explain why those expectations are not supported by market data. Referencing the chosen valuation approach. The licensee's primary duty is to provide objective, data-driven advice that facilitates an informed decision, rather than succumbing to client pressure that could lead to misrepresentation or an unsuccessful sale. Question 3. The audit findings indicate a potential issue with the enforceability of a recently executed purchase agreement for a property in Juneau, Alaska. The agreement, drafted by the seller's attorney, appears to be signed by both parties, but lacks a specific closing date and contains vague language regarding the buyer's financing contingencies. What is the most appropriate course of action for the real estate salesperson to ensure the contract's enforceability and protect their client's interests under Alaska law? Option A. Proceed with the transaction, assuming the contract is enforceable because both parties have signed it, and address any issues that arise during the closing process. Option B. Draft an addendum to the contract themselves to insert a closing date and specify the financing contingencies, as this is a standard practice to correct minor omissions. Option C. Advise the client to seek legal counsel from a qualified Alaska attorney to review the contract for completeness and compliance with Alaska statutes and common law, and to clarify any ambiguities before proceeding. Option D. Recommend that the buyer and seller verbally agree on a closing date and clarify the financing contingencies, as verbal agreements are often sufficient to supplement written contracts in real estate transactions. Correct answer is C. Advise the client to seek legal counsel from a qualified Alaska attorney to review the contract for completeness and compliance with Alaska statutes and common law, and to clarify any ambiguities before proceeding. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential issue with a real estate contract's enforceability, which is professionally challenging because it directly impacts the rights and obligations of both buyers and sellers and can lead to significant legal disputes and financial losses. Ensuring contract validity is a core responsibility of a licensed real estate salesperson in Alaska. Careful judgment is required to identify and address potential defects before they escalate. The best professional practice involves a thorough review of the contract to identify all essential elements required for enforceability under Alaska law. This includes ensuring there is a valid offer, acceptance, consideration, legal purpose, and competent parties. Specifically, the contract must clearly define the property, the price, the terms of sale, and the parties involved, and be in writing as required by the Alaska Statute of Frauds. A contract lacking any of these essential elements, or containing ambiguities that cannot be resolved, may be deemed unenforceable. An approach that fails to identify a missing essential element, such as a clear description of the property or a defined purchase price, is professionally unacceptable. This oversight could lead to a contract being voided by a court, leaving the parties without a legally binding agreement and potentially exposing the salesperson to liability for negligence or breach of duty. Another unacceptable approach is to assume a contract is enforceable simply because it is signed by both parties. Alaska law requires more than just signatures. It mandates that all legally required elements be present and clearly articulated. Ignoring the substance of the agreement in favor of superficial compliance is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. Furthermore, relying on verbal agreements to supplement or alter written contract terms is a critical error. The Alaska Statute of Frauds requires real estate contracts to be in writing to be enforceable. Verbal modifications or essential terms not included in the written document render the contract, or parts of it, unenforceable. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of every contract for completeness and compliance with Alaska real estate statutes and common law principles. When in doubt about the enforceability of a contract or any of its clauses, a salesperson should always advise their client to seek legal counsel from a qualified Alaska attorney. This proactive approach mitigates risk and upholds professional standards. Question 4. Process analysis reveals that a client in Anchorage, Alaska, is eager to invest in a multi-unit residential property with the expectation of rapid appreciation and immediate positive cash flow. As a licensed Alaska real estate salesperson, what approach best aligns with your fiduciary duties and regulatory obligations when analyzing this investment opportunity? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies and analyzes potential negative factors such as market downturns, unexpected maintenance costs, and tenant issues, presenting these alongside potential benefits to the client. Option B. Emphasize the potential for a quick sale and high resale value, downplaying any operational challenges or market risks associated with long-term ownership. Option C. Provide a quick profit estimate based on the most favorable historical appreciation data available for the area, without delving into operational expenses or market fluctuations. Option D. Focus exclusively on recent comparable sales that show significant price increases and project high rental income based on optimistic market assumptions. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies and analyzes potential negative factors such as market downturns, unexpected maintenance costs, and tenant issues, presenting these alongside potential benefits to the client. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an Alaska real estate licensee because it requires balancing a client's desire for a quick profit with the fiduciary duty to ensure the client understands the inherent risks of real estate investment. The licensee must act in the client's best interest, which includes providing a comprehensive and realistic assessment of potential returns and risks, rather than simply facilitating a transaction that might appear attractive on the surface. Overlooking or downplaying potential risks, even if the client seems eager, constitutes a failure to uphold professional standards and could lead to significant financial harm for the client. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough risk assessment that goes beyond superficial projections. This approach necessitates identifying and analyzing potential negative factors that could impact the investment's profitability. This includes evaluating market volatility, potential for declining property values, unexpected repair costs, tenant issues, and changes in local economic conditions. By presenting a balanced view that includes a realistic assessment of downside risks, alongside potential upsides, the licensee fulfills their duty of care and loyalty under Alaska real estate law and ethical guidelines. This ensures the client can make an informed decision based on a complete understanding of the investment's potential outcomes, not just the optimistic scenarios. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on projected rental income and appreciation without considering potential vacancies, increased maintenance, or market downturns is a failure to conduct a comprehensive risk assessment. This approach neglects the licensee's obligation to advise the client on all material aspects of the investment, including potential losses. Emphasizing only the most favorable comparable sales data, while ignoring recent sales that indicate a cooling market or declining prices, misrepresents the current market reality. This selective presentation of data can mislead the client into believing the investment is more secure and profitable than it actually is, violating the duty of honesty and fair dealing. Providing a quick estimate of potential profit based on a single, optimistic scenario without exploring alternative outcomes or potential challenges fails to meet the standard of due diligence. This superficial analysis does not adequately prepare the client for the complexities and uncertainties inherent in real estate investment, potentially leading to poor financial decisions. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Alaska should adopt a systematic approach to real estate investment analysis that prioritizes client education and informed decision-making. This involves 1. Understanding the client's investment goals and risk tolerance. 2. Conducting thorough due diligence, including market research, property condition assessment, and financial projections that account for a range of potential outcomes. 3. Clearly communicating all identified risks and potential downsides to the client, alongside potential benefits. 4. Documenting all advice and client communications to ensure transparency and accountability. This framework ensures that advice is not only accurate but also ethically sound and legally compliant with Alaska's real estate regulations. Question 5. During the evaluation of a potential property sale in Alaska, a licensed real estate salesperson learns from the buyer that they have recently experienced a significant job loss and are concerned about their ability to secure a mortgage, despite their enthusiasm for the property. What is the most ethically and legally sound course of action for the salesperson to take? Option A. Suggest that the buyer omit information about their recent job loss from their mortgage application to expedite the approval process. Option B. Immediately terminate the representation of the buyer, citing their financial instability as a reason, without offering any further guidance or referrals. Option C. Advise the buyer to consult with an independent mortgage broker or financial advisor to assess their current financial standing and borrowing capacity, while clearly explaining the potential challenges of securing financing given their recent circumstances. Option D. Reassure the buyer that financing is typically obtainable and encourage them to proceed with the offer, suggesting that minor financial hiccups can often be overlooked by lenders. The correct answer is C. Advise the buyer to consult with an independent mortgage broker or financial advisor to assess their current financial standing and borrowing capacity, while clearly explaining the potential challenges of securing financing given their recent circumstances. Explanation. During the evaluation of a real estate transaction in Alaska, a licensed salesperson faces a situation where a potential buyer expresses strong interest in a property, but also reveals a significant personal financial challenge that could impact their ability to secure financing. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the salesperson to balance their duty to facilitate a transaction with their ethical obligations to the client and the integrity of the real estate process. The salesperson must navigate the buyer's vulnerability without exploiting it, while also ensuring the transaction remains viable and compliant with Alaska's real estate laws. Careful judgment is required to avoid misrepresentation or actions that could lead to legal or ethical repercussions. The best professional approach involves clearly and honestly communicating the potential challenges associated with the buyer's financial situation to the buyer themselves, while also advising them to consult with an independent mortgage broker or financial advisor. This approach prioritizes transparency and empowers the buyer to make informed decisions based on realistic financial assessments. Alaska's real estate regulations, particularly those concerning fiduciary duties and fair dealing, mandate that licensees act in the best interests of their clients and avoid misrepresentation. By encouraging the buyer to seek professional financial advice, the salesperson upholds these duties, ensures the buyer understands their true financial capacity, and protects both the buyer and themselves from potential future complications arising from an unmanageable mortgage. An approach that involves downplaying the buyer's financial concerns and assuring them that financing will be secured regardless of their disclosed challenges is professionally unacceptable. This constitutes a failure to deal honestly and in good faith, potentially violating Alaska Statute 08-88-371, which outlines grounds for disciplinary action, including misrepresentation and dishonest dealing. Furthermore, it breaches the fiduciary duty of care owed to the client by not providing accurate and realistic guidance. Another unacceptable approach is to immediately withdraw from representing the buyer without offering any constructive advice or referral. While a salesperson is not obligated to proceed with a transaction that is unlikely to succeed, abandoning a client without exploring potential solutions or directing them to appropriate resources can be seen as a failure to act with reasonable diligence and care, potentially contravening the spirit of professional conduct expected of Alaska real estate licensees. Finally, an approach that involves pressuring the buyer to proceed with an offer despite their expressed financial reservations, perhaps by suggesting they omit certain financial details from their loan application, is highly unethical and illegal. This constitutes active participation in deceptive practices, which directly violates Alaska's real estate laws and professional codes of conduct, and could lead to severe disciplinary action, including license revocation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding their fiduciary duties and legal obligations under Alaska real estate law. This involves active listening to the client's concerns, transparent communication about potential risks and benefits, and a commitment to guiding the client towards informed decisions. When faced with financial complexities, the professional course of action is to facilitate access to independent expert advice, rather than attempting to navigate or circumvent these issues independently. Question 6. What factors should a licensed real estate professional in Alaska consider when advising a client on the terms and conditions of a residential lease agreement to ensure compliance with Alaska law and protect the client's interests? Option A. Presenting the lease agreement to the client for immediate signature, assuming it is a standard document and the client understands its contents. Option B. Advising the client to sign the lease quickly to secure the tenant, without detailing the potential consequences of specific lease clauses. Option C. Making minor adjustments to lease clauses that seem unfavorable to the client without explicit client instruction or legal review. Option D. Thoroughly reviewing the lease for clarity, fairness, and compliance with Alaska statutes, explaining the implications of each clause to the client, and recommending legal counsel for complex provisions. The correct answer is D. Thoroughly reviewing the lease for clarity, fairness, and compliance with Alaska statutes, explaining the implications of each clause to the client, and recommending legal counsel for complex provisions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for real estate licensees in Alaska, balancing the client's immediate desire for a quick lease agreement with the legal and ethical obligations to ensure the agreement is fair, transparent, and compliant with Alaska's landlord-tenant laws. The challenge lies in the potential for a licensee to prioritize expediency over thoroughness, which could lead to disputes, legal liabilities for both the client and the licensee, and damage to the licensee's professional reputation. A licensee must navigate the specific terms and conditions of lease agreements, understanding that these documents have significant legal weight and impact the rights and responsibilities of both parties. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves thoroughly reviewing the proposed lease agreement with the client, identifying any clauses that might be ambiguous, unfair, or potentially violate Alaska statutes, particularly Title 34, Chapter 25, Residential Landlord and Tenant Act. This includes ensuring that the lease clearly defines the rent amount, payment schedule, lease term, security deposit details, responsibilities for maintenance and repairs, rules regarding property use, and termination clauses. The licensee should advise the client on the implications of each clause and recommend seeking independent legal counsel for complex or unusual provisions. This approach is correct because it prioritizes the client's informed consent and legal protection, aligning with the Alaska Real Estate Commission's mandate to protect the public and uphold professional standards. It ensures that the client understands their obligations and rights, thereby minimizing future disputes and potential legal action, and fulfilling the licensee's duty of care. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to simply present the lease agreement to the client for signature without any review or explanation, assuming the document is standard and legally sound. This fails to meet the licensee's fiduciary duty to the client, which includes providing advice and ensuring the client understands the terms of the agreement they are entering into. It also risks overlooking clauses that may be disadvantageous to the client or non-compliant with Alaska law, potentially exposing both the client and the licensee to legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach is to advise the client to sign the lease agreement immediately to secure the tenant, without adequately explaining the potential implications of specific clauses. While speed may be a client's priority, a licensee cannot ethically or legally prioritize a quick transaction over ensuring the client's understanding and protection. This approach neglects the licensee's responsibility to educate the client about the legal ramifications of the lease terms, which could lead to future disputes and legal challenges. A third incorrect approach is to make unilateral changes to the lease agreement without the client's explicit instruction or understanding, or without consulting legal counsel. While a licensee might believe they are improving the agreement, unauthorized alterations can invalidate the contract or create unintended legal consequences. The licensee's role is to advise and facilitate, not to act as legal counsel or to unilaterally modify legal documents. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Alaska should adopt a systematic approach when dealing with lease agreements. First, understand the client's objectives and priorities. Second, meticulously review the proposed lease agreement, cross-referencing its terms with relevant Alaska statutes and regulations, particularly the Residential Landlord and Tenant Act. Third, clearly and concisely explain each significant clause to the client, highlighting potential risks and benefits. Fourth, advise the client to seek independent legal counsel for any provisions they do not fully understand or that appear complex. Finally, document all advice given and ensure the client provides informed consent before any agreement is finalized. This process ensures compliance, protects the client, and upholds the licensee's professional integrity. Question 7. Benchmark analysis indicates that the Alaskan real estate market has experienced significant price appreciation over the past 2 years. As a licensed real estate salesperson in Alaska, what is the most prudent approach to advising a client looking to purchase a property in this environment? Option A. Rely on the opinions of local developers and other salespersons regarding the market's direction to guide the client's purchasing decision. Option B. Base recommendations solely on national real estate market forecasts, assuming Alaska's market will mirror broader national trends. Option C. Advise the client that the current appreciation trend is likely to continue indefinitely and recommend purchasing immediately to capitalize on further gains. Option D. Conduct a thorough analysis of local Alaskan economic indicators, interest rate trends, housing inventory levels, and average days on market to assess the current phase of the real estate cycle and advise accordingly. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough analysis of local Alaskan economic indicators, interest rate trends, housing inventory levels, and average days on market to assess the current phase of the real estate cycle and advise accordingly. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson in Alaska to interpret market signals and advise clients appropriately, balancing their fiduciary duty with the inherent uncertainties of real estate cycles. Misinterpreting trends can lead to significant financial consequences for clients, potentially damaging the salesperson's reputation and leading to ethical breaches or even regulatory violations if advice is deemed negligent or misleading under Alaska real estate law. The salesperson must demonstrate a nuanced understanding of market dynamics beyond simple price fluctuation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive assessment of multiple indicators to understand the current phase of the real estate cycle in Alaska. This includes analyzing local economic factors such as job growth, interest rate trends, inventory levels, days on market, and buyer demand, alongside broader national economic influences. By synthesizing this data, the salesperson can provide informed, nuanced advice to clients about market conditions, potential risks, and opportunities. This approach aligns with the fiduciary duty of care and competence required of licensed real estate professionals in Alaska, ensuring clients receive advice grounded in thorough analysis and relevant market data, thereby avoiding misrepresentation or negligence. Incorrect approach is analysis. Focusing solely on recent price appreciation and assuming a continuous upward trend is a flawed approach. This ignores the cyclical nature of real estate and can lead to advising clients to overpay in a market peak or miss opportunities during a downturn. It fails to consider underlying economic fundamentals and can result in negligent advice, violating the duty of care. Relying exclusively on national real estate trends without considering specific Alaskan market conditions is also problematic. While national trends can influence local markets, Alaska has unique economic drivers and demographic shifts that can cause its real estate cycles to diverge. This narrow focus can lead to inaccurate predictions and advice, potentially breaching the duty to provide competent service. Making investment recommendations based on anecdotal evidence or the opinions of a few prominent developers overlooks the need for objective, data-driven analysis. While developer insights can be valuable, they are not a substitute for a thorough market study. This approach risks providing biased or incomplete information, which is ethically questionable and could be considered a failure to act in the client's best interest. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a data-driven, holistic approach to market analysis. This involves continuously monitoring a range of local and national economic indicators, understanding the interplay of supply and demand, and recognizing that real estate markets are dynamic and cyclical. When advising clients, professionals must clearly communicate the uncertainties inherent in market forecasting and base their recommendations on a comprehensive understanding of current conditions and potential future scenarios, always prioritizing the client's best interests and adhering to Alaska's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards. Question 8. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a real estate licensee in Alaska is evaluating a parcel of land that includes a small, older farmhouse, several outbuildings, and a significant acreage of undeveloped land. The seller has expressed interest in selling the property for its potential as a small-scale organic farm, but the surrounding area is primarily zoned for residential use with some scattered commercial properties. Which approach best guides the licensee in determining the appropriate classification of this property for marketing and client advisement? Option A. Classify the property based on a comprehensive analysis of its current primary use, potential future uses as indicated by the seller's intentions, and the prevailing zoning regulations in the specific Alaskan locale. Option B. Classify the property based on the seller's stated desire for it to be a small-scale organic farm, regardless of current zoning or existing structures. Option C. Classify the property solely based on the presence of the farmhouse and outbuildings, assuming it is primarily a residential property with accessory structures. Option D. Classify the property based on the most profitable potential use, such as a future commercial development, without confirming its current zoning or primary function. The correct answer is A. Classify the property based on a comprehensive analysis of its current primary use, potential future uses as indicated by the seller's intentions, and the prevailing zoning regulations in the specific Alaskan locale. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate licensee in Alaska to accurately distinguish between different property types based on their primary use and potential for development. Misclassifying a property can lead to significant legal and financial repercussions for both the client and the licensee, including potential violations of Alaska's real estate licensing laws and regulations, which mandate competent and ethical representation. The licensee must exercise careful judgment to ensure they are providing accurate advice and marketing the property appropriately. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding of the primary intended use of the property and its surrounding context within Alaska's specific zoning and land use regulations. This means identifying whether the property's current or most probable future use aligns with the definitions of residential dwellings, commercial business operations, industrial, manufacturing or processing, or agricultural, farming or ranching. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the core of property classification, ensuring that marketing and advice are aligned with the property's fundamental characteristics and legal designations, thereby adhering to the Alaska Real Estate Commission standards for licensee competence and honesty. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to classify the property solely based on its current physical structures without considering potential future uses or zoning. This fails to acknowledge that a property's classification can evolve and that zoning laws dictate permissible uses, which may differ from existing structures. This could lead to misrepresentation and violate the duty of care owed to the client. Another incorrect approach is to rely on the seller's subjective opinion of the property type without independent verification. While a seller's input is valuable, the licensee has a professional obligation to conduct due diligence and verify information, especially regarding property classification, which has legal and financial implications. Relying solely on the seller's opinion could lead to marketing the property under false pretenses, violating ethical duties and potentially Alaska statutes. A further incorrect approach is to categorize the property based on the most lucrative potential use without considering the current zoning or the property's primary existing function. This prioritizes profit over accuracy and compliance, potentially leading to the marketing of a property for a use that is not legally permissible in Alaska, thus misrepresenting the property and breaching fiduciary duties. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic approach that begins with understanding the client's objectives and the property's current state. This should be followed by diligent research into local zoning ordinances and land use plans in Alaska, a comparative analysis of the property's characteristics against the definitions of residential, commercial, industrial, and agricultural properties, considering both current and legally permissible future uses, is crucial. This ensures that advice and marketing efforts are accurate, ethical, and compliant with Alaska's real estate laws. Question 9. The risk matrix shows a potential conflict between a seller's explicit discriminatory preference and a real estate licensee's professional obligations in Alaska. A seller instructs their listing agent to only market their property to buyers of a specific ethnic background, stating they believe this will lead to a quicker sale. How should the Alaska licensed real estate salesperson best respond to this instruction? Option A. Proceed with marketing the property broadly, but avoid mentioning the seller's specific ethnic preference in any advertising materials, hoping the issue resolves itself. Option B. Agree to the seller's request and subtly steer potential buyers of the excluded ethnic background away from the property during showings. Option C. Politely inform the seller that their request violates fair housing laws and that the property will be marketed to all qualified buyers without regard to race, color, religion, national origin, sex, familial status, or disability, as required by the Alaska Human Rights Law and Federal Fair Housing Act. Option D. Immediately terminate the listing agreement without further explanation, citing the seller's preference as the sole reason for withdrawal. The correct answer is C. Politely inform the seller that their request violates fair housing laws and that the property will be marketed to all qualified buyers without regard to race, color, religion, national origin, sex, familial status, or disability, as required by the Alaska Human Rights Law and Federal Fair Housing Act. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee in Alaska to navigate the delicate balance between client interests and the strict mandates of fair housing laws. The licensee must recognize that even if a client expresses a discriminatory preference, the licensee's legal and ethical obligations to uphold fair housing principles supersede the client's wishes. The core of the challenge lies in refusing to facilitate illegal discrimination while maintaining a professional relationship with the client. The correct approach involves politely but firmly informing the seller that their request violates the Alaska Human Rights Law and Federal Fair Housing Act. The licensee must explain that they cannot market the property in a way that excludes protected classes or refuse to show the property to qualified buyers based on discriminatory criteria. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the discriminatory request by citing the relevant legal prohibitions and clearly states the licensee's inability to comply with the illegal instruction. It prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct, which are paramount for any real estate professional in Alaska. An incorrect approach would be to agree to the seller's request and attempt to subtly steer potential buyers away from the property based on the seller's discriminatory preferences. This is ethically and legally unacceptable because it makes the licensee complicit in discriminatory practices. The Alaska Human Rights Law and Federal Fair Housing Act prohibit not only direct discrimination, but also any action that aids, abets, or encourages discrimination. By attempting to fulfill the seller's discriminatory request, the licensee would be violating these laws and risking severe penalties, including license revocation. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the seller's request and proceed with marketing the property without addressing the discriminatory statement. While this might seem like a way to avoid direct confrontation, it fails to educate the client about their legal obligations and leaves the door open for potential future discriminatory actions by the seller. It also misses an opportunity to reinforce the importance of fair housing principles within the professional relationship. A final incorrect approach would be to immediately terminate the listing agreement solely based on the discriminatory request, without first attempting to educate the client and explain the legal ramifications. While terminating a relationship with a client who insists on illegal activity is ultimately permissible, a professional should first attempt to guide the client towards legal compliance. A complete refusal to engage further without explanation can be seen as unprofessional and may not fully uphold the licensee's duty to uphold fair housing principles by educating their clients. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential legal or ethical conflicts. In situations involving fair housing, the licensee must immediately recognize any discriminatory requests as violations of law. The next step is to consult the relevant statutes and regulations, such as the Alaska Human Rights Law and the Federal Fair Housing Act, to understand the specific prohibitions and requirements. The professional then communicates these legal obligations clearly and respectfully to the client, explaining why the requested action cannot be taken. If the client remains insistent on illegal activity, the professional must then consider the appropriate course of action, which may include terminating the professional relationship while ensuring all legal and ethical duties have been met. Question 10. The risk matrix shows a borrower in Alaska is purchasing a home for $375,000 with a down payment of $75,000, resulting in a loan amount of $300,000. Based on Alaska's regulatory framework for conventional mortgages, what is the most accurate determination regarding the requirement for private mortgage insurance, PMI? Option A. PMI is required because the loan-to-value ratio is 90%. Option B. PMI is not required because the loan-to-value ratio is 80%. Option C. PMI is not required because the loan amount is less than the purchase price. Option D. PMI is required because the down payment is less than 20%. Correct answer is B. PMI is not required because the loan-to-value ratio is 80%. Explanation: the risk matrix shows a scenario where a borrower's loan-to-value (LTV) ratio is a critical factor in determining the necessity and cost of private mortgage insurance (PMI) for a property in Alaska. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a precise understanding of Alaska's specific real estate finance regulations. particularly concerning PMI thresholds, and the ability to accurately calculate the LTV based on provided figures. Misinterpreting these regulations or miscalculating the LTV could lead to incorrect advice, potentially costing the borrower significant money or violating regulatory requirements. The best professional approach involves accurately calculating the LTV and applying the relevant Alaska regulations to determine the PMI requirement. This means taking the loan amount and dividing it by the property's appraised value or purchase price, whichever is lower. In Alaska, PMI is generally required by lenders for conventional loans when the LTV exceeds 80%. Therefore, calculating the LTV as $300,000 $375 000 equals 0. 80 or 80% is the correct first step. Since the LTV is at or below the 80% threshold, PMI is not mandated by regulation for this loan. This approach aligns with Alaska's statutory and regulatory framework governing mortgage lending, ensuring compliance and providing accurate financial guidance to the borrower. An incorrect approach would be to assume PMI is required simply because the down payment is less than 20% without performing the LTV calculation. This overlooks the specific threshold set by Alaska regulations and could lead to unnecessary costs for the borrower. Another incorrect approach would be to use a different LTV threshold, such as 90%, without regulatory basis in Alaska for conventional loans. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the applicable laws. Finally, incorrectly calculating the LTV, for example, by dividing the purchase price by the loan amount, would lead to a misinterpretation of the risk and the subsequent PMI requirement, failing to adhere to standard financial calculations and regulatory compliance. Professionals should approach such situations by first identifying the specific jurisdiction, Alaska, and then researching the relevant statutes and regulations pertaining to mortgage lending and PMI. A systematic approach involves 1. Gathering all necessary financial data, loan amount, purchase price/appraised value. 2. Performing the LTV calculation using the correct formula. 3. Comparing the calculated LTV to the regulatory threshold for PMI in Alaska. And 4. Communicating the findings and requirements clearly and accurately to the borrower. Question 11. The risk matrix shows a first-time homebuyer in Alaska with limited savings for a down payment who is interested in purchasing a property. Considering the nuances of government-backed loan programs available to Alaskan residents, which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action for a real estate licensee? Option A. Advise the client that government-backed loans are generally more complex and may not be suitable for first-time homebuyers, suggesting they focus on conventional loans with larger down payments. Option B. Provide the client with detailed information on FHA, VA, and USDA loan programs, outlining their general eligibility criteria, down payment requirements, and typical benefits, while strongly advising them to consult with a licensed mortgage lender to determine the best fit for their specific financial situation and the property. Option C. Offer to pre-qualify the client for an FHA loan by reviewing their credit report and income documentation, and then guide them through the application process. Option D. Recommend the FHA loan program as the most likely option for a buyer with limited savings, emphasizing its lower down payment requirements, and proceed with the transaction assuming it will be approved. The correct answer is B. Provide the client with detailed information on FHA, VA, and USDA loan programs, outlining their general eligibility criteria, down payment requirements, and typical benefits, while strongly advising them to consult with a licensed mortgage lender to determine the best fit for their specific financial situation and the property. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a potential client, a first-time homebuyer in Alaska, who is interested in purchasing a property but has limited savings for a down payment. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the real estate licensee to navigate the complexities of government-backed loan programs while ensuring the client's best interests are met and all regulatory requirements are adhered to. Misunderstanding or misrepresenting these programs can lead to significant financial repercussions for the buyer and potential legal issues for the licensee. Careful judgment is required to match the client's financial situation and property goals with the most suitable loan option. The best professional approach involves thoroughly educating the client about the characteristics, eligibility requirements, and limitations of FHA, VA, and USDA loans available in Alaska. This includes explaining the down payment requirements, credit score considerations, property eligibility, and any specific state or federal nuances associated with each program. The licensee should then guide the client in exploring which of these programs, if any, aligns with their financial profile and the property they are interested in, without making a definitive recommendation on which loan to pursue, but rather empowering the client to make an informed decision in consultation with a qualified mortgage lender. This approach prioritizes client education and informed consent, aligning with ethical obligations to act in the client's best interest and avoid the unauthorized practice of providing financial advice. An incorrect approach would be to steer the client towards a specific government-backed loan program based on a superficial understanding or personal preference, without a comprehensive review of the client's full financial picture and the specific program guidelines. This could lead to the client pursuing a loan for which they are not truly eligible or that is not the most advantageous for their situation, potentially violating ethical duties of care and competence. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss government-backed loans entirely without exploring their potential benefits for the client, simply because they might involve more paperwork or a slightly different process than conventional loans. This could deprive the client of a valuable opportunity to achieve homeownership, failing to act diligently in their best interest. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to provide specific advice on loan terms, interest rates, or the likelihood of loan approval, as this constitutes the unauthorized practice of mortgage brokering or lending. Real estate licensees are not licensed to provide such detailed financial guidance. Their role is to facilitate the transaction and provide information about available options. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's needs and financial capacity. This is followed by a thorough review of relevant regulatory frameworks and available product options, in this case, FHA, VA, and USDA loans. The next step is to educate the client comprehensively about these options, highlighting pros and cons without making definitive recommendations. Crucially, the professional must then refer the client to qualified mortgage lenders for specific loan product advice and pre-approval, ensuring the client receives expert financial guidance from licensed professionals. Question 12. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a particular real estate investment trust rate offers potentially higher returns than traditional direct property investments. A client in Alaska seeking advice on diversifying their portfolio and has expressed interest in real estate. The licensee is aware that they can earn a commission by recommending this specific rate. What is the most ethically and regulatorily sound approach for the Alaska real estate licensee? Option A. Fully disclose the nature of the rate as a security, its associated risks and potential returns, and any commission or compensation the licensee will receive from its sale, while also assessing the client's suitability for such an investment. Option B. Present the rate as a direct real estate investment opportunity, highlighting its potential for high returns, without emphasizing its nature as a security or disclosing any personal commission. Option C. Advise the client to invest in the rate without any discussion of its specific characteristics, focusing only on the general benefits of real estate diversification. Option D. Recommend the rate solely based on its potential for high returns, assuming the client understands the inherent risks of any investment without further explanation or disclosure of compensation. The correct answer is A. Fully disclose the nature of the rate as a security, its associated risks and potential returns, and any commission or compensation the licensee will receive from its sale, while also assessing the client's suitability for such an investment. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate licensee to balance their fiduciary duty to their client with the potential for personal gain, all while navigating the complexities of investment vehicles like rate and adhering to Alaska's specific real estate licensing laws and ethical guidelines. The licensee must ensure they are providing accurate and unbiased information, not misrepresenting the nature of the investment, and avoiding conflicts of interest. The correct approach involves prioritizing the client's best interests and ensuring full disclosure. This means clearly explaining that a rate is a security, not a direct real estate ownership interest, and that it carries different risks and potential returns. The licensee must also disclose any potential commission or compensation they might receive from the sale of the rate shares, as required by Alaska's real estate regulations concerning disclosure of compensation and avoiding undisclosed dual agency or conflicts of interest. This transparent and client-centric approach upholds the licensee's fiduciary duties and complies with ethical standards that demand honesty and integrity. An incorrect approach would be to present the rate as a direct real estate investment without clearly delineating its nature as a security. This misrepresentation could lead the client to believe they are purchasing tangible property, overlooking the market volatility and investment risks associated with publicly traded securities. Such an action violates Alaska's regulations against misrepresentation and deceptive practices in real estate transactions. Another incorrect approach is to fail to disclose any commission or referral fee received from the rate provider. Alaska law requires licensees to disclose all sources of compensation related to a transaction. Concealing this information creates an undisclosed conflict of interest, as the licensee's recommendation might be influenced by their personal financial gain rather than the client's suitability for the investment. This breaches ethical obligations of loyalty and good faith. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to push the rate investment solely based on perceived high returns without adequately assessing the client's risk tolerance, financial goals, and investment experience. While potential returns are a factor, a responsible licensee must conduct a thorough needs analysis and ensure the investment aligns with the client's overall financial profile, as mandated by ethical practice and the general duty of care owed to clients. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying their fiduciary duties and ethical obligations. This involves a thorough understanding of the product being recommended, its risks and benefits, and how it aligns with the client's specific needs and circumstances. Full and transparent disclosure of all material facts, including compensation, is paramount. When in doubt, seeking clarification from a supervisor or legal counsel is a prudent step to ensure compliance with Alaska's real estate laws and ethical standards. Question 13. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a client's proposed multi-unit residential development in Juneau, Alaska would be highly profitable, but the licensee suspects it may conflict with current single-family zoning regulations for that specific parcel. What is the most responsible course of action for the real estate licensee? Option A. Inform the client that zoning laws are often flexible and suggest they can likely proceed with the development without formal approval, as long as neighbors don't complain. Option B. Assure the client that with their financial backing, they can likely get the zoning changed or obtain a variance after the sale, so they should proceed with the purchase based on the potential profit. Option C. Proceed with marketing the property for the client's intended use, assuming that if the client buys it, they will handle any necessary zoning issues themselves. Option D. Advise the client that the proposed development may not be permissible under current zoning, and recommend they consult with the City and Borough of Juneau's Planning Department to understand the regulations and explore potential options. The correct answer is D. Advise the client that the proposed development may not be permissible under current zoning, and recommend they consult with the City and Borough of Juneau's Planning Department to understand the regulations and explore potential options. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee to balance their fiduciary duty to their client with their obligation to uphold state and local land use regulations. The licensee must navigate potential conflicts between the client's desires and the legal framework governing property development and use in Alaska, specifically within the context of Juneau's zoning ordinances. A failure to do so could result in legal repercussions for the client, the licensee, and potentially lead to ethical violations. The best approach involves proactively and transparently informing the client about the zoning restrictions and their implications. This includes advising the client to consult with the City and Borough of Juneau's Planning Department to understand the specific requirements and potential for variances or amendments. This approach is correct because it aligns with the licensee's duty of care and disclosure, ensuring the client makes informed decisions based on accurate information about land use regulations. It upholds ethical standards by prioritizing legal compliance and client education over potentially misleading assurances. An incorrect approach would be to assure the client that the proposed use is permissible without verifying it with the relevant municipal authorities. This is ethically problematic as it misrepresents the legal status of the property and could lead the client to invest time and money in a project that is ultimately non-compliant. It also violates the licensee's duty to be knowledgeable about relevant laws and regulations. Another incorrect approach is to suggest that the zoning regulations can be easily circumvented or ignored. This demonstrates a disregard for the legal framework and could expose both the client and the licensee to penalties. It is unprofessional and unethical to advise or imply that legal requirements can be bypassed. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to proceed with marketing the property for the client's intended use without any discussion of zoning implications. This neglects the licensee's responsibility to ensure that the property is marketed in a manner that is truthful and compliant with all applicable laws, including land use regulations. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the client's objectives. Then, they must research and verify all relevant legal and regulatory requirements, including local zoning ordinances. Open and honest communication with the client about these findings, along with recommendations to seek expert advice, e.g., from the planning department or legal counsel, is paramount. This systematic process ensures informed decision-making and adherence to ethical and legal obligations. Question 14. Cost-benefit analysis shows that addressing the potential environmental contamination on a property in Juneau, Alaska, before listing it could significantly delay the sale and reduce the seller's immediate profit. As the listing agent, you are aware of historical industrial use on an adjacent parcel that may have impacted the soil on your client's property. Though no formal environmental assessment has been conducted, your client instructs you to proceed with the listing and only disclose any confirmed issues if they arise during buyer inspections. What is the most ethically and legally sound approach to this situation under Alaska real estate law? Option A. Disclose the known potential for environmental contamination due to adjacent industrial use to all prospective buyers and their agents, advising them that a professional environmental assessment may be prudent, and discuss with the seller the implications of this disclosure on the sale process. Option B. Proceed with the listing as instructed, withholding information about the potential environmental contamination until a buyer's inspection reveals a confirmed issue, at which point the seller can decide how to address it. Option C. Advise the seller to begin a voluntary environmental remediation process without informing potential buyers of the ongoing assessment or potential contamination until the remediation is complete and the property is cleared. Option D. Downplay the possibility of environmental issues to potential buyers, suggesting that the adjacent industrial use is unlikely to have affected the property, and focus on the property's positive attributes. The correct answer is A. Disclose the known potential for environmental contamination due to adjacent industrial use to all prospective buyers and their agents, advising them that a professional environmental assessment may be prudent, and discuss with the seller the implications of this disclosure on the sale process. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing a client's financial interests with the ethical and legal obligations to disclose material environmental information that could impact property value and buyer decisions. The real estate licensee must navigate potential conflicts between client instructions and their duty to act with honesty and integrity, adhering to Alaska's specific real estate regulations. The best professional approach involves proactively disclosing the known environmental concerns to potential buyers and their representatives, while also advising the seller on the implications of these disclosures. This aligns with Alaska's real estate licensing laws, which mandate that licensees disclose all known material facts that could affect a buyer's decision or the property's value. Transparency, even if it potentially slows down a sale or impacts the seller's desired price, upholds the licensee's fiduciary duty to all parties and avoids potential legal repercussions for non-disclosure. It also fosters trust and ethical practice within the real estate profession. An approach that involves withholding information about the potential environmental contamination to avoid jeopardizing the sale is ethically and legally unacceptable. Alaska Statute 0888 335 requires licensees to disclose all material facts known to the licensee that affect the value or desirability of the property. Failing to disclose known environmental issues constitutes a material misrepresentation and a violation of this statute, potentially leading to disciplinary action, including license suspension or revocation, and civil liability. Another unacceptable approach is to downplay the significance of the environmental concerns without a thorough understanding or professional assessment. While the licensee may not be an environmental expert, they have a duty to disclose known issues. Suggesting the problems are minor without substantiation or professional opinion is misleading and violates the duty of honesty. It shifts the burden of discovery onto the buyer unfairly and can lead to future disputes and legal challenges. Finally, an approach that suggests the seller should handle the environmental remediation without informing potential buyers until after an offer is made is also problematic. While remediation is a seller's prerogative, the existence of the contamination and the need for remediation are material facts that must be disclosed upfront. Concealing this information until after an offer is accepted is a form of deception and violates the principle of full disclosure required by Alaska law. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency and adherence to legal and ethical standards. This involves 1. Identifying all known material facts, including environmental concerns. 2. Consulting relevant Alaska statutes and regulations regarding disclosure. 3. Communicating these facts clearly and promptly to the seller, explaining the legal and ethical obligations. 4. Advising the seller on the potential impact on the sale and recommending professional environmental assessments if necessary. 5. Disclosing these material facts to prospective buyers and their agents in writing. 6. Documenting all disclosures and communications. Question 15. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a quick sale of a property in Anchorage, Alaska, could yield a substantial commission for the listing licensee. The seller has indicated they are facing significant financial difficulties and may be at risk of foreclosure. The potential buyer, represented by the same licensee, is eager to purchase and has expressed willingness to proceed quickly, but has not been fully apprised of the seller's precarious financial situation or the potential implications for the security of their financing if the seller cannot resolve their issues before closing. Which approach best upholds the licensee's professional and regulatory obligations in Alaska? Option A. Advise the buyer that the seller's financial situation is a minor detail and not a concern for the buyer's purchase. Option B. Focus on securing the buyer's offer and commission, and only disclose the seller's financial issues if directly asked by the buyer or their lender. Option C. Fully disclose the seller's financial difficulties and the potential risks to the buyer, advising the buyer to seek independent legal counsel to understand the implications before proceeding. Option D. Proceed with the transaction, focusing on securing the buyer's financing approval and assuming the seller will resolve their financial issues before closing. Correct answer is C. Fully disclose the seller's financial difficulties and the potential risks to the buyer, advising the buyer to seek independent legal counsel to understand the implications before proceeding. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it pits a real estate licensee's duty to their client against the potential for a lucrative, albeit ethically questionable, transaction. The licensee must navigate the complexities of Alaska's real estate financing regulations and ethical obligations, particularly concerning full disclosure and avoiding misrepresentation, while also considering the financial implications for all parties involved. The pressure to close a deal, especially in a competitive market, can create a temptation to overlook or downplay crucial information. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively and transparently disclosing the seller's financial difficulties and the potential implications of the proposed financing structure to the buyer. This approach aligns with Alaska's real estate licensing laws, which mandate honesty, integrity, and full disclosure in all transactions, specifically as 0888 340 1 prohibits fraudulent or dishonest conduct, and as 0888 342 prohibits misrepresentation. By informing the buyer about the seller's situation and the risks associated with a quick sale under duress, the licensee upholds their fiduciary duty to the buyer if representing them, or their duty of fair dealing to all parties, ensuring informed consent and preventing potential future disputes or legal challenges. This transparency builds trust and protects all parties. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the transaction without fully disclosing the seller's financial distress and the potential impact on the buyer's financing security. This failure to disclose material facts violates the duty of honesty and integrity required by as 0888 341 and constitutes misrepresentation under as 0888 342. It prioritizes the immediate commission over the buyer's informed decision-making and could lead to legal repercussions for the licensee and the seller. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on securing the buyer's financing approval without addressing the underlying issue of the seller's potential foreclosure. This neglects the broader context of the transaction and the potential for the seller's inability to convey clear title, which is a fundamental aspect of a real estate sale. Failing to address this material fact can be considered a form of misrepresentation by omission. A third incorrect approach is to advise the buyer to overlook the seller's financial situation, framing it as a minor detail. This actively misleads the buyer and breaches the licensee's ethical obligations to act with fairness and honesty. It demonstrates a lack of professional judgment and a disregard for the potential negative consequences for the buyer, potentially violating as 08, 88, 340, 1 and 2. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. This involves a thorough understanding of the material facts of a transaction, including the financial circumstances of all parties that could impact the sale. When faced with potential red flags, such as a seller's financial distress, the professional's primary responsibility is to ensure all parties are fully informed and can make decisions with complete knowledge. This includes disclosing any information that a reasonable buyer would consider important in making their decision. If a licensee represents the buyer, their fiduciary duty demands this level of transparency and diligence. If representing the seller, their duty is to present the property honestly and to facilitate a transaction that is fair to both parties. In all cases, avoiding misrepresentation and acting with integrity are paramount. Question 16. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a real estate licensee in Alaska is working with a first-time homebuyer who expresses concern about their ability to manage higher monthly payments in the future. The licensee knows that an adjustable-rate mortgage arm might offer a lower initial interest rate, potentially making the home more affordable upfront, but also carries the risk of payment increases. What is the most ethically and legally sound approach for the licensee in this situation? Option A. Focus solely on the lower initial interest rate of the adjustable-rate mortgage, highlighting how it makes the purchase more affordable now, without dwelling on the potential for future payment increases. Option B. Suggest an interest-only mortgage as a way to keep monthly payments low, without extensively discussing how the principal balance will be repaid over the life of the loan. Option C. Recommend an adjustable-rate mortgage, because the lower initial payment will make the home more accessible to the first-time buyer, assuming they will be able to refinance before the rate adjusts. Option D. Fully explain the potential risks and benefits of both fixed-rate and adjustable-rate mortgages, including the possibility of future payment increases with an ARM, and guide the client in determining which type best aligns with their stated concerns about future payment stability and overall financial goals. The correct answer is D. Fully explain the potential risks and benefits of both fixed-rate and adjustable-rate mortgages, including the possibility of future payment increases with an ARM, and guide the client in determining which type best aligns with their stated concerns about future payment stability and overall financial goals. Explanation. Cost-benefit analysis shows that understanding the nuances of mortgage types is crucial for ethical and compliant real estate practice in Alaska. This scenario is professionally challenging, because it requires a licensee to balance client needs with regulatory obligations and ethical duties, particularly when a client's financial situation might make certain mortgage products unsuitable. The pressure to close a deal can sometimes conflict with the fiduciary duty to advise clients in their best interest, necessitating careful judgment. The best professional approach involves thoroughly assessing the client's financial stability, long-term goals, and risk tolerance before recommending any mortgage product. This includes explaining the potential risks and benefits of each type of mortgage, such as the payment fluctuations of an adjustable-rate mortgage or the potential for negative amortization with certain interest-only loans. Providing this comprehensive, unbiased education empowers the client to make an informed decision that aligns with their financial capacity and objectives, fulfilling the licensee's duty of care and honesty as mandated by Alaska real estate regulations, which emphasize client protection and fair dealing. Recommending a specific mortgage product without a full understanding of the client's financial situation is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to the client being overextended or unable to manage payments, violating ethical principles of prudence, and potentially breaching disclosure requirements under Alaska law. Suggesting an adjustable rate mortgage solely because it offers a lower initial payment, without adequately explaining the risk of future payment increases and the client's ability to absorb them, is a failure to act in the client's best interest. Similarly, pushing an interest-only mortgage without a clear discussion of how the principal will eventually be repaid, or if the client has a solid plan for doing so, can be predatory and violate the spirit of responsible lending practices encouraged by regulatory oversight. Misrepresenting the terms or risks associated with any mortgage product, regardless of type, is a direct violation of ethical conduct and potentially Alaska's deceptive trade practices statutes. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes client education and suitability. This involves actively listening to the client's needs, asking probing questions about their financial circumstances and future plans, and then presenting a range of suitable mortgage options with clear explanations of their respective advantages and disadvantages. The focus should always be on enabling the client to make an informed choice that minimizes their financial risk and aligns with their long-term financial well-being, rather than simply facilitating a transaction. Question 17. Market research demonstrates that many prospective homeowners in Alaska are eager to understand their borrowing capacity early in the mortgage application process. An Alaska-licensed mortgage loan originator receives an initial inquiry from a potential borrower who provides a verbal overview of their income, assets, and debts, and expresses a desire for a quick estimate of what loan amount they might qualify for. What is the most appropriate and compliant course of action for the mortgage loan originator in this situation? Option A. Request all necessary supporting documentation from the applicant, such as pay stubs, bank statements, and tax returns, and conduct a preliminary review of this verified information before discussing any potential loan terms or qualification estimates. Option B. Offer a broad range of potential loan amounts based on the applicant's initial verbal input, emphasizing that the primary goal is to secure their business and that specific details can be worked out later. Option C. Provide a preliminary loan qualification estimate based on the applicant's verbal assurances and general knowledge of market conditions, while advising the applicant that these figures are not final. Option D. Inform the applicant that a qualification estimate cannot be provided until a formal, fully completed application with all supporting documents is submitted and processed, and then proceed with processing the application. The correct answer is A. Request all necessary supporting documentation from the applicant, such as pay stubs, bank statements, and tax returns, and conduct a preliminary review of this verified information before discussing any potential loan terms or qualification estimates. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a mortgage loan originator, MLO, in Alaska to navigate the critical initial stages of the mortgage application process, while adhering strictly to Alaska's specific regulations and ethical standards for MLOs. The core challenge lies in balancing the applicant's immediate need for information and reassurance with the legal and ethical obligations to gather accurate, complete, and verifiable information before making any commitments or providing definitive advice. Missteps can lead to regulatory violations, damage to the applicant's financial standing, and reputational harm to the MLO and their institution. The best approach involves a thorough and systematic collection of all required documentation and information from the applicant, followed by a comprehensive review and verification process before any preliminary loan terms or approvals are discussed. This method ensures that the MLO is operating with accurate data, fulfilling their fiduciary duty to the applicant by providing advice based on a realistic assessment of their financial situation, and complying with Alaska's statutes and regulations governing mortgage lending, which emphasize transparency, accuracy, and consumer protection. This systematic process minimizes the risk of providing misleading information or making premature commitments that could have adverse consequences for the borrower. An approach that involves providing preliminary loan terms based on the applicant's verbal assurances and incomplete documentation is professionally unacceptable. This fails to comply with Alaska's regulatory framework, which mandates a thorough underwriting process and verification of information before offering specific loan terms. Such an action could be construed as providing misleading information, potentially violating Alaska's consumer protection laws and the ethical obligations of an MLO to act in the borrower's best interest. Another unacceptable approach is to delay the application process significantly due to minor discrepancies in the applicant's provided documents without clear communication or a defined plan for resolution. While accuracy is crucial, an excessive or unexplained delay can be detrimental to the applicant's financial goals and may violate principles of good faith and fair dealing expected of licensed professionals in Alaska. The MLO has a responsibility to guide the applicant through the process efficiently and transparently. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on securing the applicant's business by downplaying potential issues or risks identified during the initial information gathering phase is also professionally unsound. This prioritizes the MLO's commission over the applicant's financial well-being and can lead to the applicant entering into a loan they cannot afford, which is a direct violation of ethical standards and potentially Alaska's lending regulations designed to prevent predatory practices. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that prioritizes regulatory compliance, ethical conduct, and the applicant's best interests. This involves a structured approach to information gathering, diligent verification, clear communication, and a commitment to providing accurate and realistic guidance throughout the mortgage application process, always within the bounds of Alaska's specific legal and regulatory requirements. Question 18. Analysis of a situation in Alaska where a real estate salesperson, while conducting a pre-listing inspection of a property, discovers evidence of a recent water leak in the ceiling of a finished basement. The stain is visible, but the salesperson is unsure of the extent of the damage or the source of the leak. What is the most appropriate course of action for the salesperson to take? Option A. Attempt to patch the visible water stain themselves to make the area presentable for showings, without informing the seller of the underlying leak. Option B. Inform the seller immediately about the discovered water stain and advise them to have the issue professionally assessed and repaired before listing the property. Option C. Agree with the seller to simply paint over the water stain to conceal it, without investigating the source of the leak or informing potential buyers. Option D. Advise the seller that the water stain appears minor and is likely not a material defect that needs to be disclosed to potential buyers. Correct answer is B. Inform the seller immediately about the discovered water stain and advise them to have the issue professionally assessed and repaired before listing the property. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for real estate professionals in Alaska, balancing the need for timely property maintenance with the legal and ethical obligations to disclose known defects. The challenge lies in accurately assessing what constitutes a material defect that requires disclosure under Alaska law, and understanding the implications of attempting to fix a problem without proper disclosure or professional assessment. Failure to adhere to disclosure requirements can lead to significant legal repercussions, including lawsuits from buyers and disciplinary action from the Alaska Real Estate Commission. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately disclosing the discovered leak to the seller and advising them of the need for professional assessment and repair. This approach aligns with Alaska's disclosure laws, which mandate that sellers disclose all known material defects that could affect the property's value or desirability. By involving a qualified professional, the seller can ensure the repair is done correctly and that the disclosure accurately reflects the nature and extent of the problem. This proactive and transparent approach protects both the seller and the potential buyer, fostering trust and minimizing future liability. Incorrect approaches analysis. Attempting to patch the leak without informing the seller or obtaining professional advice is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This action bypasses the seller's obligation to disclose known material defects and misrepresents the property's condition to potential buyers. It also risks a superficial repair that does not address the underlying issue, potentially leading to more extensive damage and greater liability for the seller and the agent. Suggesting to the seller that the leak is minor and not worth disclosing, even if it appears so at first glance, is also problematic. Alaska law requires disclosure of known material defects, and an agent's subjective assessment of minor importance does not negate the seller's duty. This approach can be seen as an attempt to circumvent disclosure requirements, which is unethical and potentially illegal. Agreeing to the seller's request to simply paint over the water stain without investigating the source of the leak is another failure. While the stain might be aesthetically displeasing, the underlying cause is a material defect that must be addressed and disclosed. Painting over it conceals the problem rather than resolving it, creating a false impression of the property's condition and violating disclosure obligations. Professional reasoning. Real estate professionals in Alaska must operate with a high degree of integrity and a thorough understanding of disclosure laws. When faced with a potential material defect, the professional decision-making process should involve 1. Immediate identification and documentation of the potential issue. 2. Transparent communication with the seller regarding the discovery and their legal disclosure obligations. 3. Recommending professional assessment and repair by qualified individuals. 4. Ensuring all discovered defects and repairs are accurately documented and disclosed to potential buyers in writing, as required by Alaska statutes and commission regulations. This systematic approach prioritizes legal compliance, ethical conduct, and the protection of all parties involved in the transaction. Question 19. The review process indicates that an Alaska real estate salesperson has been working with a seller who recently discovered a significant, but not immediately visible, foundation issue in their home. The salesperson is aware of this issue. What is the most appropriate course of action for the salesperson to take regarding potential buyers? Option A. Proactively disclose the known foundation issue to all potential buyers and their agents, along with any relevant documentation or inspection reports. Option B. Recommend that the seller not mention the foundation issue to any prospective buyers, assuming it might not be discovered. Option C. Suggest the seller perform superficial repairs and then represent the foundation as being in good working order. Option D. Advise the seller to only disclose the foundation issue if a buyer specifically asks about the property's foundation. The correct answer is A. Proactively disclose the known foundation issue to all potential buyers and their agents, along with any relevant documentation or inspection reports. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson in Alaska to navigate the delicate balance between client advocacy and adherence to disclosure obligations. The salesperson must act in their client's best interest while also ensuring all material facts are disclosed to potential buyers, as mandated by Alaska real estate law and ethical standards. The pressure to secure a sale for their seller client can create a temptation to downplay or omit information that might deter a buyer. The best approach involves proactively disclosing the known foundation issue to potential buyers and their agents, even before an offer is made. This aligns with the Alaska Real Estate License Act's requirement for licensees to disclose all known material facts that could affect a buyer's decision or the property's value. By providing this information upfront, the salesperson demonstrates honesty, transparency, and a commitment to ethical practice, thereby protecting both the seller from future liability and the buyer from unforeseen problems. This approach fosters trust and can lead to a more informed negotiation process, ultimately serving the long-term interests of all parties. An incorrect approach involves waiting for a buyer to ask specific questions about the foundation before disclosing the issue. This is problematic because it relies on the buyer's diligence and may be perceived as an attempt to conceal information. Alaska law requires proactive disclosure of known material defects, not reactive responses to direct inquiries. Failing to disclose a known material defect until prompted can violate the duty of honesty and fair dealing owed to all parties in a transaction, and could lead to legal repercussions for both the seller and the licensee. Another incorrect approach is to advise the seller to make minor, cosmetic repairs to the foundation, and then represent the foundation as being in good condition. This is a direct violation of disclosure laws and ethical duties. Misrepresenting the condition of a material component of the property is fraudulent and unethical. It undermines the integrity of the transaction and exposes the seller and the licensee to significant legal and financial risks. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to suggest that the seller simply not mention the foundation issue, hoping it goes unnoticed. This is a passive but equally damaging form of non-disclosure. Alaska's regulatory framework places an affirmative duty on licensees to disclose known material facts. Ignoring a known defect, even without active misrepresentation, constitutes a failure to meet this legal and ethical obligation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency and legal compliance. When faced with a known material defect, the first step should be to understand the specific disclosure requirements under Alaska law. The next step is to discuss the issue openly with the seller, explaining the legal and ethical obligations and the potential consequences of non-disclosure. The salesperson should then advise the seller on the best course of action, which typically involves full disclosure to potential buyers. Documenting all discussions and disclosures is crucial for professional protection. Question: the review process indicates that an Alaska real estate salesperson has been working with a seller who recently discovered a significant but not immediately visible foundation issue in their home. The salesperson is aware of this issue. What is the most appropriate course of action for the salesperson to take regarding potential buyers? Options: A. Proactively disclose the known foundation issue to all potential buyers and their agents, along with any relevant documentation or inspection reports. B. Advise the seller to only disclose the foundation issue if a buyer specifically asks about the property's foundation. C. Suggest the seller perform superficial repairs and then represent the foundation as being in good working order. D. Recommend that the seller not mention the foundation issue to any prospective buyers, assuming it might not be discovered. Question 20. Performance analysis shows that the Anchorage commercial real estate market has experienced a significant increase in demand for office space due to a recent influx of tech companies, while interest rates have also risen by 1.5% over the past 6 months. A commercial property in downtown Anchorage, previously valued at $2,000,000 based on a 7% capitalization rate, is now being considered for sale. The property is expected to generate a net operating income (NOI) of $140,000 annually. Given these economic factors, what is the most appropriate estimated market value for this property? Option A, $1,900,000. Option B, $2,100,000. Option C, $2,000,000. Option D, $1,750,000. The correct answer is D, $1,750,000. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an Alaska real estate licensee by requiring them to analyze market data and apply economic principles to a specific property valuation. The challenge lies in accurately interpreting fluctuating economic indicators and their direct impact on a property's market value, necessitating a nuanced understanding beyond simple comparative market analysis. The licensee must demonstrate sound judgment in selecting and applying appropriate valuation methods, considering the unique economic landscape of Alaska. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves calculating the property's potential annual net operating income (NOI), and then applying the current market capitalization rate for similar commercial properties in the Anchorage area. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the income-generating potential of the property, which is a primary driver of value for commercial real estate. The Alaska Real Estate License Act and associated regulations emphasize the importance of accurate property valuation, and the income capitalization method is a widely accepted and robust technique for commercial properties. The capitalization rate reflects the market's current expectations for return on investment in that specific market segment and location, making it a direct measure of economic influence. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely rely on the average price per square foot of recently sold residential properties in a different, less economically diverse Alaskan city. This is professionally unacceptable because it fails to account for the specific economic drivers of commercial real estate in Anchorage, ignores the property type, commercial vs. residential, and uses data from an inappropriate market. Such a method would likely lead to a significant undervaluation or overvaluation, violating the licensee's duty to provide competent and accurate services. Another incorrect approach is to simply add a 5% appreciation factor to the property's last recorded sale price, without considering any current economic data or the property's income potential. This is professionally unacceptable, as it ignores the dynamic nature of real estate markets and economic influences. Alaska's economy, like any other, is subject to fluctuations in resource prices, tourism, and population shifts, all of which can significantly impact property values. A static appreciation factor is not a reliable valuation method and fails to meet the standard of care required by the Alaska Real Estate License Act. A third incorrect approach is to average the asking prices of all currently listed commercial properties in Anchorage, regardless of their size, condition, or location. This is professionally unacceptable because asking prices are not necessarily indicative of actual market value. Sellers may list properties at aspirational prices, and the market will ultimately determine the sale price through negotiation and actual transactions. This method does not reflect the economic realities of what buyers are willing to pay or what investors expect as a return, leading to an unreliable valuation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach property valuation by first understanding the property type and its primary value drivers. For commercial properties, income potential is paramount. They should then identify relevant economic factors specific to the local market, a NCH, Chinese letter C, HORGE in this case, and select valuation methods that directly incorporate these factors. This involves utilizing reliable data sources and applying accepted appraisal principles. When faced with economic uncertainty, professionals must exercise extra diligence, potentially employing multiple valuation methods and providing a range of values with clear explanations of the assumptions made. Adherence to the Alaska Real Estate License Act's requirements for competence and accurate representation is crucial.